Hey guys, welcome to the Thunk Tank podcast. We like to have cool conversations while drinking craft beer. And for this episode, we're doing part 2 of the Intellectual Dark Web, or IDW. If you haven't heard part 1, we released that about a week ago. This basically just picks up right where that one left off. We cut our 2-hour conversation into 2 parts. So this one begins, we are talking about sort of societal problems and inequality and issues around that and perspectives from the left and right on that. You don't have to listen to part 1, but it will definitely make a lot more sense. I also gave a lot of framing in the introduction to part 1. I'm not going to do that here. I'll keep this short, but basically I think the IDW is an important movement. I did finish the blog post on that, so you can find the links in both part 1 and part 2, or just go directly to our website. I flushed it out with a lot of sources and ideas, and hopefully you can engage with them. I'm open to change my mind, but yeah, that's what I think. So please read that. I do want to just frame this episode with a cool quote I heard. Brett Weinstein has a video on YouTube called The Phenomenon of the Left and Right. And so he kind of frames it as, well, if you're on the left or liberal or progressive, you generally want the world to change for the better. And if you're on the more conservative side, you generally like categories and you like to keep things that are working the same. You know, change seems risky. And he had a cool quote, which was, "I am a liberal who wishes to live in a world so good that I can be a conservative." And there's something about that quote that I just really liked. It helped me consider that, you know, we constantly have to camp and decamp from different sides in order to really understand an issue. And there is no one ultimately correct way to view anything. You have to constantly be flexible in how you think. And I do believe that the IDW has helped me and probably many other people, discover this flexibility of mind in this crazy political climate we're in. All right, Patreon. Thanks to everyone who donates to us on Patreon. Helps us keep the podcast hosted. We do provide bonus content on there. For example, we have Drunk Tanks where we record a little bit extra after the podcasts end. We also will post other bonus content. So for this episode, for example, I have like a 5 or 6 page kind of just all my notes that I took as for researching this topic. It includes lots of links and articles and all sorts of things. So if you're interested in the topic and you would like to go into more detail, go over to Patreon and you can find that post where I'll put up the Word document for that. And finally, don't forget about our hang-up game. As I was editing this episode, I totally forgot that we generally do this in order to just end the podcast at some point. One of us hangs up on the other person. I won't tell you who win, but let's just say Johnny's a big fat loser, something like that. All right, enjoy Intellectual Dark Web Part 2.
Attention humans, this is a Thunk Tank. Please insert this podcast directly into your nearest orifice for viewing pleasure.
Okay, you ready? Oh shit.
Welcome to the Thunk Tank. Welcome to the Thunk Tank.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Welcome, come into our Thunk Tank.
Luke, don't switch to the other peanuts.
Welcome to the Thunk Tank. Come in the tank. We're thinking, and we're drinking,
and we're thunked.
Oh my god, I'm probably more beer than man if we go far enough back at this point. Well, I think if they kind of generalize, what it is, that like, oh, I shouldn't have to pay taxes for this, right?
Sure, but it's like, oh, you'll pay those taxes in police force if you raise a whole generation of people that don't learn how to be part of society.
Great point, but you don't.
So yeah, that's even the selfish, like non-compassionate view. It still makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Which is how you have to argue to Republicans, right?
Luke, that whole thing you just what you just said about how much insanely better it's gotten. You got to think from the other perspective. To them, it's insane that it's not. We're still not there yet.
Like
That's
it was
a fair
supposed
point,
to have
too,
happened.
yeah.
It was supposed to have happened in 1865 in this country. It was supposed to have happened in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act. And the fact that a lot of those people that like their grandparents thought it would happen in their lifetime and they're like long dead now.
Fair point.
Like that's really frustrating to them. So they think that it's totally fair at this point. So yeah, you got to get involved because some social programs have worked and have helped. Like Jim Crow would have just they did and still do terrorize blacks in the South to take a specific case, but like you had the federal government come in and pass a Voting Rights Act and like force them to you got to tip the scales and force the hand there. The culture was taking too long to reach equality on its own, so they came in and integrated the schools, to a lot of people, this is just the next step to that.
Well, I think that's the ultimate
to them,
radical side, though, right? Like that's like you were saying earlier, Johnny. Like that's kind of I think just in terms of understanding, like you were saying, Luke, like why there's this ideology of like, well, we suffered long enough. Now it's time to turn the tables. I'm not surprised by that is all I'm saying. Right?
I guess I'm not surprised, but what I'm surprised by is that embedded in the ideology that is pushing for this are a few, let's say, tactics and assumptions that I think only a minority of people have actually decided to use. And the majority of people that sign up only know what's on the label of the box, which is equity proposal.
But this is what we've been talking about, where
Things
people
like
only
this.
read the labels of the boxes.
Right.
This goes for everything.
But if you get into, let's say, think through the sort of assumptions, the scariest one for me about this is that there is no such thing as a logical conversation. You cannot have a dialogue either. Like those Antifa recently took over the streets of Portland and were directing traffic.
That's a wild video.
What you realize is that
wild.
This is misguided outrage. If you want to be outraged about inequality in the world, there is a place to do that. And also there is a mature adult way to not only feel that, but channel that into something useful.
Well, not if you feel like
you don't
have
see
no
that
other
happening
outlet.
Coming from the new left.
But don't you feel like that's why they're doing it? Because they feel like there is no outlet. Like it's been going on for so long and it continues not to change. That like I'm just saying in terms of why it's happening, right?
I could understand depending on the person and the situation, like it can cause the feeling of outrage. Yeah. Although one of the weird things about outrage culture, which is this thing on the new left, especially on campuses, is if you look closely, I've watched many, many hours, way too many, of protest videos from various colleges. And you inevitably see a few insane people screaming their heads off and a lot of other people tagging along, and a lot of them are laughing. They're almost just like excited to be at something exciting.
Is they want to get in on their Instagram story. Because they want views and they want likes. Because we live in that fucking no, that's a real problem. It's Elon Musk was talking about that on the Joe Rogan podcast. A lot of people that you think are happy online, they're miserable people because they're following along and they're trying to ooh, no filter. Ooh, look at this. Ooh, I know this is going to be trending later. Let me get a clip of it. Put that on my social media. Get some likes, get some shares. Yeah.
You know what other scary emotion comes hand in hand with miserableness?
Hungry?
I mean,
I was just thinking how I feel right now. I'm not miserable, but I am hungry.
Resentfulness.
And
I think,
what sense?
Like resentment is one of the most terrifying emotions if you let your brain fully feel it, because it will allow you to destroy things without even knowing you're doing it.
And it's kind of hard to come back from, right? Like
it is.
Feelings of resentment.
The deeper you go into resentment, the more you will argue for your original point, despite not admitting you were wrong.
If you had to ask me, like, would you rather have to hate something or resent it? I'd rather hate it because I feel like I can step back from hate and I can say, wait a minute, why?
Yeah, it's harder to step back from resentment.
Resentment's like,
it's a pool. It's a hot tub you don't want to slip into mentally.
I was going to say, what happens when you slip? It's not good.
Yeah, I don't really hate Trump as a person. I kind of resent what he's doing to my country, though.
That's fair enough.
So, Johnny, have you found anybody on this quote-unquote new left SJW type arena that sort of calmly speaks the way you do, or do you find it's mostly this Trojan horse thing where they're sneaking in equity proposals underneath seemingly innocuous, like surfacey good things.
No, this is from real time conversations. I live in a pretty liberal kind of collegey town, and I just know a bunch of people that like are intelligent and think this way, and like make the points I've made that are like pretty reasonable and
I agree with
have a self-awareness that
of making them.
So it's from talking to real people that some I agree with on some things, some I disagree with, but
and you know what else you didn't do when you were telling me about them? You didn't call me a Nazi.
Well, you weren't acting. Well, so that's
no
the
Hiles
thing.
yet. So
the thing we have to do is the way, because I like to bring the Enlightenment up a lot, because those ideas we're shifting away from that era, I think, in a lot of ways. But it was really a struggle after like the Middle Ages. Things were pretty bad, the Dark Ages, and then the plague killed a lot of people off. But after that, there was a redistribution of wealth just because there's so many people were dead. So like they just started. They had a chance to approach things a little bit differently. And like it was super repressive religiously. Like the religion justified the power structure and vice versa. So it was hard to come up with new ideas and present them and unpopular things. And they had to argue that like schools came out of the monasteries and all that. And the way they got around it was the old argument. It's like, well, you can't think those thoughts because they're ungodly thoughts. Or this isn't science. This is black magic. Well, if God gave me a brain that was able to study this stuff and able to think these questions while worshiping him, like in genuine awe of his creation, like, isn't it worse for me to not do it? Like that was the argument that convinced the clerics, like, okay, yeah, I mean, as long as you're not going against the church, you're doing it to better the church and better Christians' lives and all that.
Talk about a Trojan horse.
All right, technically, that's how we got science out of it, the scientific method, and it just took off from there. Right. So we need a modern version backdoor of that,
IDW.
where it's, well, if you feel so strongly about your ideas that you don't think you need to argue somebody with it, you're that sure about it, then that's more of a reason to argue it. Because if it's that strong of an idea, you can prove it by just going out there and beating it up yourself or attacking it.
And this is a general thing on the left, is they don't want to, like, if you just recently saw what's his name, Steve Bannon was on Bill Maher's show.
I saw some of that.
And Steve Bannon was supposed to go to this like conference with the New Yorker and have like this interview, and people freaked out, like, how could you let Steve Bannon on? They had this whole like uproar, and then they canceled his appearance, right?
Giving a platform. That's what it always is. You gave a platform.
Do you have a good idea? Are you not capable of speaking with Steve Bannon and like combating his ideas? Do you have real ideas?
But I kind of don't want to pay him either.
That's why it's funny that Bill Maher had
no payment
because
this was about like his ideas are too dangerous for people to hear. It's like no, people are hearing them, and the more you try to silence it, the more they're going to hear it.
Well, we see that actually.
Draw people.
Ironically, you see that on both sides of the spectrum. Whenever somebody gets kind of called alienated in that way, boom, they soar within those communities.
And this is something the left has not figured out. The more they try to protest,
the best example though is that
the more popular
Jordan Peterson is so popular because
the left made him popular.
Because it's
paying his rent.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I would say that's a large part of it. But
what are you saying, Johnny?
But the best example of it is that Milo Yiannopoulos guy. He was all over the place. He was a troll. He would just say inflammatory things to fire people up and get clicks.
They call it lid baiting.
Yeah, but why? He was really good at it, and then he went on one of those long form structures, the Joe Rogan show, and Joe just let him talk and
he
asked follow up questions and got him to make some bad pedophile comments, and then he stood by them, and it was like, oh, you gave him a platform to show how horrible he is. Like everyone stopped wanting to click on the guy. So there's it's just great because Bill Maher was the only other like show I think.
And I watched the interview.
Had him on.
It was fine. He talked to.
It was weird. It
was weird, but like he's not like some wizard who's going to mind warp everyone to vote for Trump in the next election. Like, if you have ideas...
Yeah, you don't know that.
You should be confident enough in those ideas to actually talk against your opponent.
Oh, yeah. So that's what I was trying to say with the... Like, that's how... that's how the Enlightenment snuck its way through super religious Western Europe.
Yeah. And became the scientific revolution.
So we need a modern like intellectual revolution like that, where people start valuing
what this is. Maybe.
Well, I think again, a lot of it is we're catching up. Like, I really think this can't be understated. How like we don't know how to use the internet. There was never an instruction manual. There was never a class on this.
And we're only 5 years into
it's
this
changing.
Really being a problem, like 2013.
Well, we're only.
Now.
I mean, you can break down the sort of the history of it. And it's like, all right, when was the internet? When did it become a thing? Essentially, with email, about 20 years ago, right?
Check porn and stock quotes.
Only in the last 10 years do we have social media. It's only been for like half of the internet that we have social media. So that's only in the last 10 years. Twitter was like 2006, I think.
But Twitter didn't take off until a bit later.
That's my point. Yeah. Like, we haven't even been actually using it.
We're babies at this.
We're not, we're not even aware that we're in it.
But Twitter and Facebook and all these, they update so frequently that it feels like they're just part of our lives forever.
Well, it is such a huge part of our lives, and we don't know how to use it, and we don't know how to use it responsibly in terms of what we share, why we share it,
and we don't know how the business model. The business model
doesn't know how to
around
use
it.
The business models don't know how to use it either. This is like what we were talking about with these news outlets, right?
It hasn't set, like, it's constantly changing. Yeah. Like, Amazon was a bookstore, ran out of a guy's garage, and it's the most profitable company in the world now. Facebook was like, remember we had Napster or Friendster, MySpace, and
LiveJournal,
all these LiveJournal, and all these different things.
Yeah.
And then Facebook swooped in and sucked them all up. But Facebook is like, nobody joins Facebook anymore. They lose more accounts than they get now. So, like, Facebook's on the decline. They're going to disappear one day. Like, what the hell? What the hell is Twitter going to be when we all have chips? You know, it changes so much. We're never going to know how to use it.
Radiolab did a really cool podcast about Facebook and their hate speech policy, just to talk about how complicated these kinds of things get. And it was all about, like, what is the line between free speech and hate speech. And I highly recommend the episode. I forget exactly what it is. I'll try to link to it if I remember. But, it just talked about intersectionality, which is something that we brought up earlier, is a concept from the left that, like, every person is existing at some intersection in society that involves their age, their gender, their race, their, economic status. And all these things intersect to provide certain, structures within society of more power, less power, and it's all an interplay of power like this. So on one hand,
Luke,
what?
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, isn't that just trying to take a multivariate analysis of your current situation?
Right. So I'm trying to build the steel man of like why intersectionality could be a good thing, like as a concept. And so to look at something from, as Johnny said, a multivariate analysis, which is, I'm here as who I am right now for many, many reasons. Some of them are biological. In other words, I have a penis because of the SSRI protein on my Y chromosome.
Go on.
Is going to be a porno soon.
Oh, God.
Oh, God. What did Johnny just do?
God, what is he doing?
He's making... Oh, God.
He's making emojis on the video screen.
No, I'm not. I'm just feeling.
Oh, boy. Oh, yeah, that's...
I want to say they're blowjob emojis, but I don't know how to characterize that.
Well, there's a lot of... I'm not going to finish the sentence I started.
You could go back to your point.
There are biological reasons for who I am right now. There's socioeconomic reasons, right? Was I raised in the most wealthy family? Definitely not. But was I much wealthier compared to the rest of the world? Yeah. For sure.
You're in the 1%,
Has that affected
bro.
me? Yes.
You're in the 1%.
Has being a male affected the way people treat me? Obviously, right? Has being white affected the way people treat me?
Has it affected
Obviously.
what people expect you to do and be? Yeah.
Are all those components so individually calculatable that we can make some grand model that's exactly to the T? Your level of oppression that you have, had is exactly this much from this. No, right? So I think as a zoomed out concept, intersectionality has something to say about what it means to be a human being in a complex society where many factors are all playing together, right? But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give you concrete. It's not as scientific as, say, particle physics. It's not nearly as tight a knowledge scheme as, evolution.
So we have to be careful about upholding the power of the scientific viewpoint and separating the softer social sciences from the more legitimate academic pursuits of truth. This is a message of the IDW generally, which is we have to be careful about letting ideology slip into academic departments where the quality of the academic work is going down.
Well, in terms of academic departments that are based on like empirical observation and evidence, like you're talking about, like,
and skewed at that. You know?
Well, you're saying that it's being skewed from these ideologies, essentially
because the ideology has infested certain departments. Their aim is no longer the pursuit of truth, no matter what it be. It is, I want certain conclusions to be true, and I will throw away.
Well, this comes
whether
back
consciously
to
or subconsciously.
Right?
It's narratives, right? But the fact that something like that could infect the university system, right? The institution that we base our knowledge of truth on, right? It's easy to think like, oh, what's the big deal? But like, maybe it won't affect us in the next 20 years all that much. But in 100 years, if you can't depend on experts to tell you true knowledge, that's terrifying.
I think this will all be moot in 100 years. The robots will be ruling,
there's a chance something way bigger will come along and force us to throw away all this bullshit and
the singularity will take care of all of it. But we're good.
I wrote in my notes here. I wrote a little bullet point just called "The Power of the Scientific Viewpoint." You want to just like tell me why the scientific viewpoint is not just science itself, but the scientific method, the viewpoint is, important.
Why it's in terms of just...
Yeah, I'm lobbing you a tennis ball. Like,
I was going to say, okay, so the scientific method, well, we've only had it for 400 years? It didn't exist.
A little less.
Yeah, until relatively recently. Well, until the Enlightenment, right? I mean, that's kind of an Enlightenment era. It's probably... in some ways, I think the most valuable part that came out of that whole movement, and it's this idea that not only can you, I mean, to me, Johnny, I want to know what you think after what I say, but to me, it's about that, all right, let's step back from what we think we know, use observation and experimentation, and not only do that to get results, but repeat those tests and repeat similar tests and compare and contrast the results that we get,
and try to prove them wrong.
So
exactly. Yeah, I mean, a lot of problems are solved when you work with the same data because you know what I mean? It makes arguing easier. So the scientific revolution was a lot of different things. It was the process, but like the kilogram is a kilogram because it was an exact amount of a certain heavy metal. I forget what, platinum or something.
Wasn't there like an original?
If you made
an original one.
Veritas.
There's an original one.
Yeah, it's like the original kilogram or something.
But there's a way. There's exact directions to make exactly 1 kilogram, like to make the tool, and they made them all in one place, and they sent them to every major city in the Western world at the time, all of Europe. And that way you could if somebody said they shipped a kilo from Venice and it gets to London, you could check and see if they were fucking with you or not, instead of having to argue. And it just makes human interactions a lot cleaner and smoother.
It gave a
when
standard.
You work with the same data. Yeah, when standardization was probably one of the biggest things, and we're losing that with information now. We don't have, Joe's right, we don't have like experts. People already don't trust experts unless they're experts. And it's like or unless we're moving away from standardization.
Unless it agrees with what they already think. This is something that I was talking about today in class about research studies, and I told them what you're going to find when you research whatever topic you're looking into is a million studies or bullshit news reportings about studies that are either made up, misconstrue the truth, pick one element of the data and present it as a flashy headline, and it's all bullshit.
6 glasses of wine plus chocolate a day will reduce your risks of Alzheimer's.
It will also cause all the cancer ever and cure all the cancer ever.
We didn't say anything about cancer.
Yeah.
But again, and what I tell them is that you need to you need to go to the original data and the original sources and verify it for yourself. And then I have a list of all different ways to assess valid sources, and you can see they're sort of like, this looks like a lot of work.
And it is like, a fucking lot of work. Guess what? I don't have time. So you know what? I'm just going to take the conclusions of the commentariat that the news is giving me.
Chocolate cures racism?
Yeah,
let's bite into it. Come on.
The best example is if teach a man right? Teach a man to make fire, you'll keep him warm. But set a man on fire, he'll be warm for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that's
like, well, the guy
saying.
Lifetime warmth is way up. Yeah, lifetime warmth is way up with this one trick, guys.
Yeah, that's
just
not
click to
true.
Find out.
But Johnny, what you were saying about the kilogram is a perfect example of, in order for humans to get along with each other, we need a shared narrative, a shared baseline
we're
of knowledge.
We're too tribal, and we like to bicker to begin with.
So imagine if we were fighting about something, and you were selling me a product, and I'm fighting about your prices, right? We can fight all we want about the prices, about your philosophy of setting the prices at a certain amount, all that shit. But if we start fighting about what the definition of a kilogram is, we've lost all hope, because now the one thing that we should be as objective as possible about,
I'm trying to
can't agree on.
I'm trying to buy half a shipload, and you're trying to sell me a full shipload that I don't believe you have. I think it's only half of a shipload.
Right.
So we're arguing different things. It's
well, then the argument becomes, wait a minute, fuck me, fuck you.
Yep.
And then and guess what happens then? Violence. Like actual violence, not the kind the new left calls, which are like, oh, you hurt my feelings violence.
Yeah, it's the kind of violence which is...
well, if conversation fails, all you have left is violence, right? And one of the things I see as a general trend in our country right now is we used to have more of a strong shared narrative of what it means to be an American, what it means to live in a system where we say, no, like disagreeing is part of the process, but we, in a zoomed out way, have a more shared narrative of like, you can always say whatever you want. You can criticize the current people who are in power.
Are you going to show the John McCain video?
Oh, I have that.
I think it's because right after they said that speech, they would often say, "Sit down, enter racial slur here."
This seems like it might have been from like
say whatever you want, but sit down, you dirty blank. Like pick one.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people are just and because of history, and we actually find out about the bullshit stuff our country did. Like we know about the fucked up things the CIA's done to us, the Tuskegee experiments. It makes people be like, fuck this country. Whereas if you go to Russia, their version of like the world wars are a lot different than ours. Or if you go to China, you still can't learn about Tiananmen Square, and it was 30 years ago.
Right.
So it's our system is kind of more vulnerable to that. But that's kind of why I like it better.
I want to play a quick clip of John McCain's concession speech, because it just goes to show you how fast, like this. If you want to understand how the polarization has turned up, just imagine, like this is 10 years ago.
Imagine Donald Trump trying to give this speech,
or Hillary Clinton.
Anybody today.
My friends, we have come to the end of a long journey. The American people have spoken. And they have spoken clearly. A little while ago, to congratulate him on being elected the next president of the country we both love. In a contest as long and difficult as this campaign has been, his success alone commands my respect for his ability and perseverance, but that he managed to do so by inspiring the hopes of so many millions of Americans who had once wrongly believed that they had little at stake or little influence in the election of an American president is something I deeply admire and commend him for achieving. This is an historic election, and I recognize the special significance it has for African Americans and for the special pride that must be theirs tonight.
We didn't know how good we had it in 2008 when we were demonizing John McCain, and I was playing my part. I was definitely, I was 19 years old at 10 years ago, and I was obviously
we smoked cigars in your backyard on election night.
I remember that.
We were so confident. We voted, and then we went back to your house with some beers and some cigars, and just listened. We listened to the results around the fire on NPR.
But key phrase there, I just want to point out before we move on. He says, "I imagine the pride that is theirs tonight." Again, what we've been talking about all along. Thinking about even if you can't, like he's like, yeah, I'm not a black person. I don't know how much pride they must feel for something like this, but I know that that's how they feel, and that's so different from where we are today.
Yeah.
That ability to recognize how people feel and why they feel. You don't see that in a politician or a mainstream.
Well, when you look at like the SJW, if you type that into YouTube, you see those crazy people screaming at you. But when you actually talk to people, like it's very different. It's that kind of, they're just like, well, yeah, see how bad things have gotten? Like, I just want people to be more aware. Like, you should just, before you say something, be aware if it's offensive, if it's possibly offensive to someone and things like that. Like,
case, right?
But I'm just saying, like, no, but to do it to like an extra step, be like, oh, maybe this person, because of this, it's just like, giving that extra allowance or whatever you want to call it. Because of that, like, zoomed out, whatever. Sorry, go ahead with your point. I don't know why I chimed in. No, I didn't have much there. We're losing the gist.
The gist of it is that at the time I was like, oh, McCain's giving his concession speech. That's it.
I didn't think about it. You're right.
But now I look back on this and I think to myself, okay.
I'm blown away
by the maturity of that speech.
Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it?
See, that's hyper-normalization right there. You've gotten so used to Trump. It's been 2 years is a long time. You've just gotten used to his level, his level of discourse to the point where you're like floored by that. If you go back and read old Obama speeches, he seems much more like Lincoln than Trump. Like, it's even though it's only 2 years ago, like it seems way closer to the old days than to where we are now. Because shit moves fast.
Yeah,
it
internet
really
era,
does.
baby. Information age. Industrial era is done.
Yeah, it's over.
Elections for the past many, many, many years have been more or less a 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans.
And Soviet Russia.
But that's not even most people. We don't even get, like, what? We get about a third of the country to vote?
Yes.
Oh, you're going to have a lot more than that this election.
I think so.
I bet, but
I'd be interested to see what that turns out.
Are we going
to
get to half?
On both sides, you're going to have a lot more.
Can we actually get half of a democracy to vote? That would be great.
You're gonna have close to 50% this election. I'd bet money on it.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot more.
Let's see.
Election.
I mean, the midterms will be like something that points in the direction of what we can expect.
I think this is going to be the highest midterm turnout in a long time. I don't know what it's been like historically.
Things could get way worse depending on the midterms, though. Like they go through.
Well, it's also it's a midterm, but it's a census year. The last census midterm year was a presidential election year, so the midterms, you know what I mean? It's not the same thing.
True, yeah.
This year, whoever wins is going to be the congressional class that does the redistricting. So is it going to be Republicans that further the gerrymandering and preserve what they've done, or Democrats coming in and trying to make it more accurate, which would be way more in their favor? So that's why it's a huge one for
gerrymandering's a whole other fucking thing.
Especially
it's a whole thing. You're right though to point that out.
But you brought up midterms. All I'm saying is this is a huge because it's a census year and it's going to affect voting districts for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, so they're the short games in politics. Like, let's say it was just a board game. The Republicans are way better at playing the board game of U.S. politics than the Democrats are.
That's what happened in 2010. Yeah. Obama got elected. They won the midterms. They were able to block a lot of his stuff for the next 6 years, and they laid the district for these bullshit wins they've gotten since then, and that they can hold. So yeah, it's a big.
They're also way better at setting a narrative election because they have holes in their narrative, just like the left. But the left has sort of propped up the voice of like, oh, our version will be shut down opponents, and that's how we keep our narrative. Whereas the right's like, oh, it's
do you know what
God.
the perfect example is? Trump, because look at the insane shit Trump has gotten away with, and he hasn't lost Republican support. Like evangelical voters.
Which shows you the spineless, I remember thinking like a while ago, oh, Trump won't get the really religious people because like, how could they possibly swallow what he's saying?
Yeah, he cheats on it.
Turns out no problem.
He cheats on his wife. He says all this insane
shit. Squeeze them titties and yell for God while you're doing it.
And it's like, well, he's going to pick the Supreme Court nominee I want. So
that's right. He doesn't matter. He's doing God's work, whether he wants to or means to or tries to. He's doing it. He's passing all the things the pastor is saying, has been saying they need from politicians for years, and he does it. Who cares if he's out there banging porn stars? He's doing the things the ones that have a wife and 2 kids won't do, and is like so that's why he's their guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't care. Like
Fair
they
enough.
don't.
It works. It works. They're on the same page.
It's something you see on the left too, which is they say the lie is not a bad thing as long as it's forwarding some kind of policy that is good.
Larger policy.
Also, generally, any religious base, don't mean to offend any listeners here, they're pretty much suckers for the whole salvation story. Bush Jr. was a recovered alcoholic that found Jesus. Like, they ate that shit up,
I think salvation stories are good because I really believe in it. It's from like a Buddhism thing, which is you can always begin again,
Yeah, sure.
And that's what the salvation story is. It's the phoenix. It's the phoenix can burn, and in the burning, you burn away all your past problems, and you're born new, right?
And that's what elections are. Yeah. How do we get on this? I thought we were talking about the IDW.
Yeah, I've got one thing I'll say, just to sum up the scientific viewpoint thing. I wrote a little quick bullet point here, which is objective facts are the fairest way to agree on a premise before you analyze or debate a topic. So the IDW has plenty of internal disagreements and debates about shit, but watching it feels healthy. Watching the debates between the people in the movement feels healthy and feels, like it's a stimulating, real conversation. It's a good faith conversation where both people end up in a new place from where they started. That's the kind of conversations that excite me, where people are like, hey, I'm at the edge of my knowledge. I'm just trying to honestly communicate what I think. Let's like figure it out together. Like, that's the style of conversation I see from the IDW that excites me. What I see from the characters on the quote unquote new left is more, it's like a tactical game. It's like, how can I win? And winning is just shutting down the other person. And whether maybe the person doesn't know it, but often maybe they do know that it's okay to lie as long as I win, because me winning means my righteous policy succeeds or whatever. I just think we should not abandon objective thinking. We should not abandon the scientific viewpoint because, like you said, Johnny, with the kilogram, if we just abandon the fact that the kilogram is a real measurable thing, we can't just utter untruths and get away with it endlessly. Like,
no, having the same first principles starting point is necessary to get anything done. Yeah.
And so much of what the left is doing right now, or I should say the new left, is they're saying, you know what? I want to prove the power I'm wielding over you by forcing you to say something that's untrue. So the gender pronoun thing fits more into this category. And I wanted to just give this last little cool idea of the IDW before we finish this episode, which is the idea that the IDW wants to do something for the left that, in other words, they want to steelman the left and do their job better for them. So, Jordan Peterson, for example, he came to the forefront because of the whole controversy surrounding a bill in Canada called Bill C-16. This was a bill that was enshrining into the law certain ideological conceptions of what is sex, what is gender, and what is gender identity. I'll spare you the details, but essentially his objection to it was on a few bullet points, very understandable if you listen to his video. None of the attacks that ensued against him actually contended with his views, but
I mean, just in general, and tell me if I'm wrong, my understanding from what I've heard him say was that it wasn't that he was even against the ideology, it was that he was against any type of codified compelled speech. Like, it could have been to say to say that well, you have to say anything.
Yes,
it's that he was
saying that it's never there was never in any example in English common law of there is one thing on restricting the freedom of speech in certain scenarios, but it's a completely different thing.
Like yelling fire in a crowded theater or something like that?
Or directly inciting violence, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's a completely different thing to compel speech. And you might say, oh, they're not going to put you in jail. It's like, no, they'll fine you. And then what happens when you don't pay the fine? Then they eventually put you in jail. So it's the same difference. And it's like, well, he decided, I'm going to draw the line right here because I don't like where this is going. And it's one of those things where he knows half the professors I work with don't agree with this policy. but none of them are going to stand up and say shit because they just want to keep getting their paycheck.
And that came up in the Kathy Newman interview, which was it's hilarious from the point of how utterly miserably she kind of bombed that.
But she insisted on that premise, even though he corrected her right away.
She says, "Well, you told a student that you wouldn't say use that pronoun." He's like, "That never happened."
Yeah.
He's like, "In fact, they asked and I did."
Also, he's gotten most of his letters from trans people have been letters of support from the trans community saying,
well, that's what he says,
these activists don't speak for me. Like, this is a minority, a very vocal minority." So anyways,
ultimately they want to be treated with respect to like people, like most people, right?
Right. That most people are normal people.
What a shocker!
Psychotic,
right?
and they don't create internet campaigns and start giant movements and try to take over university campuses.
Like I have transgender.
Oh, are you calling Rosa Parks an internet maniac now, Luke?
Yes, exactly.
What a fucking white privileged piece of shit!
She was racist for wanting to sit on that bus.
Anyways,
wow.
Moving on.
Hey, folks, don't sample that.
Yeah,
you know me.
Don't isolate and repeat that
the first time.
I might run for city council someday.
But I mean, I've had you. Can't.
I might run for Galaxy Council.
Yeah, that you
make sure you delete the frog suit tweets.
Yeah,
otherwise.
But I've had I have transgender students. Is like if they tell me like, oh, I prefer to go by this. It's like, okay, fine, like. Not a problem.
Especially if they ask you in like a "Hey, this makes me feel better" kind of way.
It's the same.
Hey, I'm going to compel you because I have power over you.
It's the same. It's the same thing if a student asks me to, because I have a lot of international students, and sometimes they're like, "I'd rather you use my traditional name from wherever I'm from," or they'll say, "I feel more comfortable using an Americanized name
because you're going to butcher it." Yeah,
and I'm like, fair enough.
And I've
had that conversation too with them where I'm like, it's funny and they are sort of surprised, but I'm like, yeah, like I'll try to learn your name. And then we talk about we can talk about that. We can have a conversation about that. And I think to your point, Luke, I don't have a problem with that. And I think a lot of people don't. And that's a big difference from just saying well, maybe necessarily that you just have to do it. Right. So,
and his argument was, okay, let's take the transgender pronoun thing. If anybody doesn't know much about this, and this is one of the problems I found generally with genuine people on the left, is they're not necessarily aware of what the extremes on the left are saying. So there are trans movement websites. I remember going to one I saw in a cafe on someone's computer was a little sticker that said equality is not enough. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. I went to the website and it was insane. It was just a completely different ideology than what most people think they're signing up for. It was essentially an equality of outcome type thinking where it showed that classic picture of three people watching a baseball game, but the fence is one height, but the people are different heights, And so it's you have to give this one a stool that's 5 feet and this one doesn't need
You're describing it terribly.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means. What is that?
So there's a cartoon that explains to illustrate the difference between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity, and it's three different heighted kids trying to watch a baseball game over the fence, and one kid's really tall, one's kind of too short, one's really too short. And so that's the equality of opportunity side. And then the equality of outcome side shows them each with a box that puts them able to see the game at the same height.
Oh, so they all have different sized boxes.
Because they're starting from...
To make them at the same endpoint.
What the hell does that mean?
It means it's a silly cartoon that doesn't account for a multivariate version of what reality is.
So what is it trying to... I don't understand
what it's trying to say. That equality is not enough, meaning you can't just say, hey, everybody gets an equal starting point, is that... whatever in this intersectionality, right? There's sort of a hierarchy of who, so a black trans woman is highest up on the hierarchy of their opinion, according to the theory, their opinion is most valid because of their life experience. And any criticism against that better be careful about where it's coming from, because otherwise you're not allowed to cross that boundary and criticize that. You can't criticize their lived experience is the terminology.
But isn't that a difference between I mean certain people, so if you take race for example or gender or whatever, if people have been raised in certain ways or just have had different expectations put on them or different opportunities available to them, offering them more resources isn't that the same thing? But I don't think that's a bad thing. It's I was saying
not necessarily.
That's what I'm saying. When I worked in that school, that was kind of the idea, is offer like that. I hate to use a cartoon box example, but offer that box to those people because they have had no access to that opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
So like that seems to me like a good iteration of that.
Okay, but you're already more complicated than a picture.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So because I'm confused.
So I want to have this conversation with people of this ideology, but they don't want to have conversations.
So what
I've had that conversation with people. Who are you having trouble having this conversation with?
Name me seven.
Because you're on a college campuses and shit. That's why I talk to real people.
Yeah, so in my life, I've generally found talking to real people who have to deal with real life, they immediately have a different perspective than college students who honestly, especially now, like their version of what it means to be an adult is just totally skewed.
Well, do you know what I think a good question to ask, and this is maybe something you want to try moving forward, is just start by, all right, what's your ideal outcome? What's your ideal world? What's your ideal situation? What is utopia?
Is it possible? That's what I asked earlier. I said, what degree, what amount of suffering is allowable? Like, at what point should we say, hey, let's be careful because the more we correct it, the more suffering we're going to create, right? And I don't know where that line is.
Well, it depends on how you're correcting, yeah.
Now, let me steelman the left, because there's a great example that's very close to the job I do of where this kind of progressive thinking is really helpful. So I forget the details of this, but you can look it up. I have the gist of it, which is in sometime, I think it was in the 80s or the 90s, in professional classical music orchestras like New York Philharmonic, right? Mm-hmm. Atlanta Symphony, symphonies, they started having all auditions behind screens.
Right, and that's
prior to that, almost no women were winning jobs.
That's standard practice.
And guess what happened after the screens? You started to see like the involvement of women in orchestras skyrocket.
Yeah.
So that was a clear example of there was an underlying or even very obvious sexism and institutionalized bias within the choosing process for orchestras that got fixed when they put up the screens. So there you go. Oh, that's a proposal. That's a proposal that makes sense and that you can statistically look at and say, look, we got rid of this bias. Now, I think if you were to get rid of the screens today, it might still be a bad thing for various reasons. Like, I think it's safe to just leave the screens up.
Yeah.
It's definitely a weird way to have an audition.
Especially because it's not a visual medium at all. There's no reason to see
There's no reason to see it, and it should theoretically all be about playing.
But in that case, it seems to work.
By the way, the screens come down in the final round. It's just the initial 2 rounds. It's usually a 3-round process.
Well, fair enough, though.
And that's fine because at the final round, you're now saying, how does this person interact? You might even play within the section and try out how do they sound with the other people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's so many more performance-based things at that point.
But that's a great example of this is a proposal that worked, and it actually was an unfair bias against women.
Right, and that's what happens. There are certainly ideas and situations, but you have to identify what are the ones that are
which disparities are actually unfair because of sexism or racism, and which disparities are because they are. Is the fact that 25% of Google is women, is that all sexism? Is it 10% That's a question that takes a multivariate analysis, but that's not what the James Damore memo, in the mainstream media, talked about.
Well, hold on. Before you jump to that...
Oh, God.
Easy, big fella.
We're on 2 hours.
Oh, jeez. I just lost it.
Anyway, so we'll go a little longer.
It's going to have to be, yeah.
I lost it. What were we just talking about?
I brought up the James Damore memo, and you said,
just before
big
that.
fella.
Just before that.
He was talking about how
the classical music, putting the screens up.
Oh, yeah. So what happens when it backfires, though? What is the appropriate response?
When pigs start winning jobs?
When Jon Stewart...
I don't know how to respond to that.
Jon Stewart started The Daily Show, he said, okay, we're going to hire... He said the same thing. He said, we're going to just have them submit writing samples because I don't want a room full of a bunch of white Jewish writers, just like me and my friends or whatever, writing, we want some diversity. So we'll only accept writing samples and hire you anonymously. And they got a room full of white writers, white male writers.
Really?
And he was like, yeah. And he was like, shit. So that backfired.
So then
they had to go out of their, they had to go out of their way to look for diversity. And it's so sometimes you do have to, actively account for it.
Right. No, I mean, and each each situation will be different probably, and the point is you have to like go based on data and figure out, is this working? So Eric Weinstein brought up this really cool thing, because I like the idea of, he is, of the IDW members, he's one of the most firmly on the left. And something really cool, if you've heard of Ben Shapiro, depending on what kind of internet usage you generally do, you may have even heard abhorrent things about this guy.
That was so condescending, Luke. I love how you said that.
I mean, people use the internet differently. Some people only use Facebook, and that's their internet usage. And
I know, I heard it in your tone. I just appreciate it.
Yeah, it was very tempered for
palpable.
How confident you were that you're better than everyone. I really appreciate it.
Well, I don't pick up trash on the beach, so I'm not that good.
We'll be there Sunday. Like Sharon.
You're only internet good. You're not beach good.
Right.
Yeah, you're not ready.
And so I would say Ben Shapiro of the members in the IDW, he's the one that does the lib baiting. This is like where he purposely baits like leftist people to like just have a reaction.
To break down,
and, you know, a lot of times it's just unnecessary. But one of the cool things that has happened is Ben Shapiro was a very sort of, let's say, black and white thinker about the transgender issue. And in some ways, I respect the idea of like, hey, let's not confuse gender with biology, because a lot of people on the left are saying, you know, a transgender woman is just as much a woman as a biological woman. That is not a fact. That is untrue. But you're forcing
legally
me,
they can be. Who cares?
Yeah, but you're forcing me to say something that's untrue as a power game, and so he was reacting against that. But one of the cool things I love about Eric Weinstein is he said, no, I see this differently. He said, I like to camp. This is a phrase I used in the beginning. I like to camp and decamp. He said, so my scientific brain is perfectly happy making the distinguishment between a biological male and a biological female. But at the same time, I also see a human
go
being.
back. Distinguishment? Huh? Come on, you know the word there.
He's distinguishedly distinct in his distinguishment. So go fuck yourself.
I was about to
go on. No, Luke, I got you. Go on. Just keep rolling.
None of those.
Yeah, okay, Joe, academic wizarded it around that for me.
Academia, Jenga your ass.
I was actually about to do a beer burp as I was saying that. I was trying to do like a Rick and Morty style burp.
Wait, where did the burp go?
Oh, okay.
It went back in my stomach. Till next time.
Nobody's listening at this point.
No, this is going to be a two-parter.
Still.
So, anyways, as a zoomed out thing, Eric Weinstein has a really cool model for how a mind could be. And he says there are different rooms in his house, and he has the atheist room because he is an atheist. But he's also very Jewish. And he loves the religion. And he talks about, like, the room of faith in his mind is very important. But he likes to describe his mind as, like, it's a house with all these rooms, but the walls and everything are clear, so he can see through to the different rooms. So there's never too much compartmentalizing.
Wait, this weird fuck lives in a glass house?
As his model for his mind, I'm talking about.
Wow, you're hard to derail tonight. I don't like this.
So he gave a cool
on point.
Yeah, he's so on point.
He gave a cool model of like, look, it's less important about what's factually true if someone's saying, hey, can you call me a she instead of a he? It's more like, hey, there's a human being, a soul in front of me that needs to be cared for. And so it's from this compassion point that the voice of the left, I think, should be coming from. But my argument is that if it were coming from pure compassion, the transgender movement of pronouns and whatnot wouldn't be doing what it was doing with, 30 plus different Z, Zer, Ziz, all this stuff. It would say, hey, there's a phenomenon called intersex. And that is where you're missing a protein on your, I think it's the Y chromosome, and it makes you are born with the externals of one genitalia and the internals of another. And it's very confusing about which sex you're going to choose to be. And often it can be a whole thing, right?
Well, it can be a spectrum of things, which is what they're saying.
Yeah,
right?
and so he's saying like the logical place for this whole language of what to say around like gender, that would naturally emerge in this area if it were coming from a pure compassion point of view. For example, we used to call married women Mrs. and unmarried women Miss. And then starting in the 70s, this other term Ms. MS period came in. And it was a way to equalize that, hey, why do we have to distinguish whether a woman is married or not, but not a man? For a men, it was Mr. or Mr. For women, there was a difference. So now there's this Ms., which is like whether you're married or not, you're a Ms., right? It doesn't have anything to do with marital status.
Right.
And that naturally got adopted into the language because it made sense, and it took some time, and now this is generally what people use.
Well, there was no law on that, was
there? There was no law.
Yeah.
It was naturally what got adopted.
It was an emergent sort of philosophy in terms of like what we should adopt.
So he brings up in Turkish, so when is the one time that you inflect for gender in English? It's in the third person, right?
Yeah.
He or she. In Turkish, there's one pronoun for he, she, it. There's no gender. Even nouns don't have a gender like in Spanish or French.
What the fuck are the French supposed to do? Yeah.
Well, so he's just saying, like, if you wanted to say, hey, from a pure point of compassion and of being useful and actually succeeding, I want to make one backwards incompatible change to the English language and make a third-person gender-neutral pronoun that will satisfy everything from the most extreme cases of intersex all the way down the line to all the fluidity of gender. If you just have this one neutral pronoun, and we'll make one backwards change, it will be rocky at first, but then it will get adopted like Ms. did over 10, 20 years.
But what if I feel like I'm whatever? Like,
a lion?
Sure, and I feel like that's as valid as male and female.
Well, that's on you, but that's not on society to validate it for you.
Yeah, but I can do what I want
and
to
also,
promote that, can I?
What I'm distinguishing is the difference between making a voice of compassion, meaning you're feeling pain for others and trying to help them, and a grab for power. So what I see from the protests and the way people speak who are, pushing forward the gender pronoun thing is, it's almost like a power game. They want you to say their words, and they will make you do it. And it started to creep into law, and that's where someone like Jordan Peterson said, whoa, this is getting out of hand from like you're being psychologically like, messed up as a person to now you're enshrining it in law, and you're going to get people to put me in jail for it. He's like, I'm going to say what I have to say about this way earlier than, it gets to, let's say 20 years from now.
You're pointing your hand up again.
I'm putting my hand up.
Johnny can't
Can
see
you
it,
turn
but...
your video off and on again? Turn it off and on. That fixes it.
Oh, yeah, that might work. So, yeah, I like the idea that the IDW could... There we go. I like the idea that the IDW could be not what the left currently has painted it to be, which is like this alternate voice for the right, but that let's make the IDW the intelligent voice of the left. In other words,
I agree
Eric
with
Weinstein
that,
said, how about us in the IDW put forth the policy of let's contact some linguists and let's change the English pronoun to be a gender-neutral pronoun, and let's see how the left attacks us for that.
That's
isn't that clever?
And that's the whole comes back to the whole Trojan ideal, right? I actually really like that. Yeah,
it's clever because it's like, wait, are you in the us versus them thinking,
right,
or you really want to see change in the world because that will affect how you react to what we do.
It breaks down sort of that partisan boundary, right? Like which is where we're at now.
And also, like in a country, like I said, more or less 50-50 elections, do you want to defeat the other person? What would that mean? You have to live with them. You have to live in the same country as these people you quote-unquote defeated.
Against?
Well, we're going back to we've made this point on the Think Tank before, which is ideologues aren't effective generally because they won't sacrifice their principles to get real-world results, which is what you need to do in every field, including this, right? We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
That idea. It's like, well, I can't convince you science is the answer, but if I could convince you God wants science or God gave you science, then really you're being ungodly if you don't accept science. Like whatever, it worked for you. I'm still getting to do my science. However you justified it, whether I really am like fully in agreement or okay with it or not, like you just get that shit done so you can.
Well, people go for the smaller victories and they don't worry about like, oh, do I have to agree with you 100%? Which is exactly what the IDW is. It's a bunch of people that said, hey, we don't agree on a lot of things, but we do agree on one thing, the primacy of intellectual honesty and of objective thinking. The idea that there is an objective way to view the world, the scientific viewpoint is extremely powerful. And if we were to have any grounding in a premise that we can all agree on, it would emerge from the scientific viewpoint, and we can have our debates from there, but fall back on something common.
Well, it comes back to the kilogram example where we need
That's a great example.
We need to at least agree on that. And
if you can't agree on a kilogram, you're fucked.
Well, you're not gonna ever actually accomplish.
That's where it's going, though, right? Can you agree on a number? How many people were at Trump's inauguration? Can we agree on a number for that?
So many people too. It's like I mean, you see this again on the partisan sides where they're routed in straw man arguments where. You can say, well, they say this, or you hear this, and it's like, well, who's actually saying what exactly?
Yeah.
And if you don't tell us, it's like, well, fuck yeah, it's easy to tear down somebody who isn't an actual person who's actually making an argument, which is why it's so ironic that the Steel Man is now. I mean, I had not heard of Steel Man before this year.
Isn't that sad?
It's very sad.
That should be something I learned in like middle school. Steel manning,
dude.
You know?
It's not something that anybody learns at any level. Like I'm starting to use it now in my class, and students are like, "What?"
I think if you use Steel Man and combine it with this concept of camp and decamp, that's the super powerful thing. It's like,
well, I think that teaches you compassion too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote this little thing, and by the way, I'm going to make a short blog post to go along with this
short
episode.
Blog post.
No, it's going to be shorter than last one.
It's going to be like 10,000 words. Watch.
No.
Luca Festo, 2-point dark web.
I really am not planning on it being that long, but I did write.
He said planning, keyword. No promises. Ladies and gentlemen, all 7 frogs.
I did write a category. I haven't wrote it into a blog post yet. I just wrote an outline, but I wrote something called the leftist personality that turns me off. And I sort of called this compartmentalized compassion. And I said, I don't really trust anyone with compartmentalized compassion because I've done a lot of meditation and I've done a lot of specifically meditation on compassion. And it's where you just like sit there and try to, you start with one person, then you maybe start with yourself even, then your dog, then your family, and you expand outward into the whole world, and
you're
say,
sitting on your dog.
May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy in body and mind. May you be truly happy and free.
Oh,
and
that.
You try to genuinely wish this on the world.
Oh, that.
And you can get to states of mind where you genuinely wish compassion and good vibes on everyone. What I see though is a confused hijacking of the compassion muscle by ideology. And you know it when you see it because there's no distinction between justice and mercy. The ideology that, let's say, as a virus almost takes over the compassion muscle in the brain, it gets off on putting people down. It gets off on revenge. It gets off on like shutting people down and winning. Whereas true compassion is like, hey, I want to understand you, right? I want to see how it is you became the person you are. What life circumstances led Donald Trump to be Donald Trump? Like, how can I view him as like a little baby that just didn't get loved in the right way?
Can I do that and also fuck that guy?
I mean, you can do both, right? You can camp and decamp, as I said, But like I think you should have a camping room, which is compassion for all.
I gotta have a glass house now.
And I don't think it's compassion if you have compassion, but it's compartmentalized and like I only have compassion for this person. I mean, they don't even have compassion for all women because it's like believe all women. Unless that woman is saying something different than my narrative, then she's a traitor. It's like, well, then you don't really have much of a theory there, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm talking about like one of the threads.
Yeah, you're losing me, Luke.
One of the threads in general is believe all women, right? But let's say there's a woman who's black who's Republican. It's like, well, she's that's ridiculous.
You're trying to cover too much in one episode, I think.
You're overreaching, man.
Fair enough.
Well, I think I'm getting motion sickness. We're just covering too much. We're covering too much.
You're going to the black Republican woman.
All right, so let me just say one last thing.
I made a lot of points.
I wrote this closing paragraph, Johnny.
Oh, fuck, he got me. Oh, they didn't even give me a chance for my would you rather. He just ranted about, I don't even know what the last thing was about. Women Republicans or something. But yeah, he got me, so you're going to hear them last. That's how we do that hang-up game on this cast. I think that was pretty good. It wasn't very funny. We might put a disclaimer, this episode is not that funny, but it was interesting, hopefully. And we covered a lot of crap, so... yeah, sorry if we said anything that makes you hate us. We probably don't hate you. I pretty sure I don't. I speak for them too, I guess. Sure, we probably don't hate you, so don't get too upset with anything we said. And thanks for listening, if you did listen this long. And yeah, all right, here they are.
Boom. That was too easy.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy. So he'll speak first, right?
He's really pissed right now. I feel bad for. I'm not gonna lie. I feel bad for him.
So instead of trying to rant on and do anything too crazy, there's a lot. There will be a blog post that accompanies this. I also recognize it's like kind of an awkward topic. But the fact that it's awkward is part of what motivates me to speak about it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, again, this comes back to what we've been talking about. Like, we need to be able to have conversations about this where your contribution to the conversation isn't just emotional reaction. Emotional reaction has its time and place.
Emotions are beautiful, and they can be amazing, but they also have their dark element, and they can't always be trusted.
You need to be able to temper them to a point of, let's look at reason. Let's look at alternate perspective.
Find a balance.
Let's look at objectivity. I mean, we've talked about all of this, but yeah, I mean, I agree in general. But
the fact that like so often in my daily life, saying thoughts that I have, I feel like, oh, I better not, right? That's kind of annoying to me. Yeah. And I think one of the things I've loved about the IDW in general is it's kind of given me more courage to say the few things I'm actually confident in, to actually say them. I would say most of what I said in this episode, I kind of delivered it with the sense of, I'm only mildly confident in this.
Yeah.
I'm open to being, to editing my beliefs.
But that means that you're ready to have a conversation with somebody, which is healthy.
Yes.
That's fine.
That's all that means.
Like, I'd rather have a conversation with somebody who is open to, who presents their argument as like, well, what do you have to say? Than I'd much rather have a conversation with that person who I totally disagree with than somebody who I totally agree with, who's just like, here's what's true.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that's not a conversation.
You're just talking at me then. It's not a conversation.
I found in this leftist personality that I just get turned off by, I find they're not really talking to me. They're looking towards my direction, but they're almost talking into some like warped reflection mirror that ends up back at their ego, and they're just talking to themselves and reinforcing what they believe.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, this comes back to everything we've said as well, but like, I think the right has been so good at that for so long, and the left is now catching up.
Well, they're trying it, but it took on a life of its own. That it's like a fire that they can't control almost. Yeah. But I think they have to shut it down and reset from honesty.
Well, IDW, like, share, and subscribe.
I think there's something really powerful here. If
we'll cover this
if you've heard forward. Like things about the IDW and it's been mostly negative, probably that's a picture that has been painted, and or maybe it's someone who's been called as part of the IDW that I would say is not in the core group.
Oh, you're about to be,
because nobody in the core group says anything very radical, to say like biological sex exists. That's not radical, but
for some
people it is, right? So anyways, I think it's also a movement of like everyone has an individual responsibility to speak their mind honestly, right? Nobody gets mad at Tom Brady for throwing an interception.
Oh, fuck that guy.
He sucks. They tell him throw the ball down the field,
New England fans.
And it's kind of assumed that sometimes he'll mess up, right? So if you're a commentator for politics or you're a comedian like a Bill Maher, and your job is to try and be funny, right? You're going to throw an interception sometimes. You're going to mess up in that attempt. When he said the N-word, that was a mess up on Bill Maher's part. He owned up to it, and I was actually really happy to see that although they tried to take him down, it didn't really work, right?
Yeah.
Because that was just an honest mess up. He's not racist. He's the... Maybe not the farthest thing from whatever that phrase
but
means.
He's not the guy to go after.
He's clearly not the guy to go after. That was a mess up, right? For anybody that accidentally says small, like individual soundbite things, if you're going through your life and thinking, how can I take people down that disagree with me? It's like, all right, go live your life that way.
Vibe,
that's a shitty way to live your life, but okay. But if you're going through your life and thinking, how do I get along with people? How do I build a future together with people? Because we have to occupy the same planet, How do we share a narrative? How do we zoom out and have at least a conversation where we're touching on the same reality,
same kilogram,
the same kilogram. Let's have the same kilogram.
let's end it at same kilogram.
Boom. Peace.
Thanks for listening.
Oh, yeah. Also, thanks for sticking through. This is going to be a two-parter.
All two frogs.
But, stick to the kilogram.
We'll be back. Yeah, I got some crazy more pictures to show you.
All right. Peace.